hi everybody. This is Conrad Agramont. Welcome to another Agile IT Tech Talk. For today's topic, we're going to focus on Active Directory health check. Now, this is something that here at Agile IT we do. It's almost included in almost every project that we do. You know, so actually doing like mail migrations or something to do with identity. It's quite important, as we'll talk about here in a second. But I also have Miguel Escalante here, who's one of our engineers who will help me out on this topic as we go through it. It's maybe not some of the most exciting information sometimes, but when you're in IT and you're thinking about your identity, this is a topic that really should be addressed often, because as you'll know from the world of managing infrastructure, if you neglect Active Directory, it will catch up on. It will catch up to you. So what we're going to do here is just go through a few different items here. So first off, let's talk, Miguel, a little bit about, some signs, right? I mean, obviously you want to check it frequently so that you kind of prevent these types of issues from happening as much as possible. But maybe you can cover a couple of these of, what are some of the signs of things you'll hear customers or yourself see that you'll say, hey man, I think something's happened to our Active Directory?
Well, more often than not, Conrad, we start to see login delays or certain inconsistencies when users log in. Now, the thing here to note is that if it becomes an issue that is not raised up to IT or to management, it just becomes part of the norm. Well, it takes me a minute and change to log into my workstation. Well, it takes me, however long to get an email address generated or a user provisioned. So that's also on the user experience side, whereas they start to become accustomed to what the norm is. Usually we start to see issues with groups not replicating across at the speed that we would want them to. If it's a large organization, we can expect delays, but if it's an organization with 2 sites, we start to see long delay in replication. That's an issue. We start to see login problems, especially for users that have been provisioned recently. Let's assume that we have a new employee. We should be provisioning accounts an hour before, but sometimes it happens with a business process for security. They don't have their account till an hour before they start their first day at the job. And they come into the office and they can't log in. That would be a symptom of something's going on with my identity boundary being Active Directory at this point, or at this, topic. The other would be inconsistent behavior. For example, you have certain computers that are getting a policy, certain computers that are not. Those types of things should at least be a warning to the end user, which is seeing this all the time, to be able to raise the issue up to IT, and at that point, they should start looking into this.
Yeah, you bring up a good point, because sometimes users just take their IT services as this is the way it is, and it may not have always been that way, right? But somebody out on the site it's just taking a little longer now, and they go, well, I guess it's just the internet is slow or my computer is slow, but the computer is really trying to work to find something out. And the reason we bring these topics up is because, one, these are signs to listen to go, oh, it's probably an AD thing, not so much the workstation thing. And the other is, if your users might be having or experiencing these issues, but if you're not doing your own AD health check or asking us to do it for you, or if it's something we manage for you and we do it ourselves for you, if it's not happening, you may not know that your users are suffering. So let's talk a little bit about, what are some of those areas that you need to look at. Now, some of these things, I think, you could think, well, they're kind of givens, right? But a lot of times, like I'll say, and maybe you could talk a minute about it, Miguel, is that when we go to connect into a customer site, even sometimes they know they have issues, even though they perceive that maybe that there's some problems in there, they either don't know where to look at, or they take for granted the seriousness of what some of those things are. Like, let's say orphaned objects, right? Like, oh yeah, there's some servers in there that are old servers, but we don't use them anymore. So what's the big deal? Well, they used to be domain controllers or something like that. It's a pretty big deal, right? Because the whole infrastructure is built on this kind of this trust of knowledge, right? If DNS says there's a domain controller, there must be a domain controller, which means I can ask it questions. And so if if the workstation is logging on, finds that workstation and it doesn't exist, what happens?
Well, first of all, you're going to see delay in log on time.
Mhm.
Secondly, you're going to probably start to see issues in the event log. The other problem that you're going to see here, specifically on the topic of orphaned objects, because I think it's an important one to cover a little bit more in depth than a little bit of the other ones. Time service is another big one that we'll touch on. But orphaned objects is usually the most common symptom or the most common cause of Active Directory issues. That being said, is most people, and not, I'm sort of generalizing here, but certain organizations of a certain size, when they decommission a domain controller, it's because it's failing, the hardware gave out, or something that was a catastrophic event took place, and they just decide either not to power it on or just shut it off without doing anything else. That actually leaves a lot of orphaned objects in the metadata, both in the DNS zone, in Active Directory sites and services, and in Active Directory users and computers. Now, the problem is when it starts to replicate. So sort of one thing goes on another, right? When a domain controller is starting to replicate to one that doesn't work, it starts to generate errors in the event log, application and security log, and system log. There is a setting in Active Directory that tells us, okay, if you can't reach certain domain control, if you can't reach all the domain controllers that you're configured to replicate to in the organization by X threshold, and that varies, it can be anywhere from 60 days to whatever you set it to. Default, I believe, is 60. Don't quote me on this because it changes from revision of AD. It stops replicating the sysfile volume. It does that to protect itself. So then you have a problem of inconsistent sysfiles across the organization. That will hold your policies, that will hold your objects. That basically is a huge problem, because if you want to add another domain controller later, then you're coming into an environment where it's not ideal for you to put this new piece of infrastructure in. The other piece that we're going to talk about is DNS. This is going back to DNS services. Now, we leave this orphaned object there, right? Yeah, we deleted the object from using computers. We deleted the replication partner from all the other sites and services. If we're lucky, that server that went down did not have any master roles, which are the top 5 roles, right? And if it did, then we need to seize them. That's another process altogether. So a lot of these things compound on each other, and going, back into DNS, there's 7 different locations that you need to go to. If you have Active Directory integrated zones, then you need to take a look at that as well. So as you guys can see, it's important, and it's quite one area is very interrelated with the other. So there's a lot of connection points.
So if you have something like a domain controller that just dies and that sucker's not coming back, it's not just as simple as, hey, just delete that server object from AD. There's other elements. That's one thing to kind of consider. But if you don't have that, like I said, it will catch up to you, because it is kind of sprinkled around in other locations. So replication was one. So one of the scenarios we talked about was, hey, that I might be able to log on to, when I'm in one office I can log in, but the other office I can't, and that might be a symptom of just replication, because if there's in this kind of scenario, there's a domain controller in each area. Just let's say it's one flat forest domain, but they're not replicating all of it or any of it, then that would be kind of a good representation of why that is, and or of that experience, and because things aren't replicating. But it might not be replicating because they're not referencing each other anymore. There's something else that's preventing a replication issue that's happening. And users sometimes just will accept it. Like when they go to the other site, they log in, but because maybe you can't find a domain controller on that one, it'll it could say, I'll use cache credentials, or I get in eventually, or I'm prevented from logging on. So all these things kind of come back to things that, from an AD health check perspective, you could find out early, without your users having to contact you. The other one is around DNS servers, DNS services and servers. So, in looking at, the one thing that is the most vital in not just an AD infrastructure, but really all, the world of the internet is today. It's not like it was back in the 80s. You could probably live without DNS a little bit, but everything is built on DNS services, and Active Directory is 100% dependent on DNS services. So, one, because that's again, that kind of trusted understanding of how things work. Like, I don't know if people know this, it's my little fun fact that I like to bring up both in lots of different scenarios. I even bring it up in interviews, I'll tell you that, around DNS. Like when your computer turns on, one of its first things it does is says, you know, it has no idea where it is. You know, its computers are dumb, right? It asks questions and it says, hey, I'm a computer and I belong to this domain, and I'm gonna ask my DNS server, where is this domain? And if I'm at Starbucks, it'll like, I have no idea where this thing is. Oh, okay, I'm remote. If I'm on-prem and my local DNS or local DHCP points me to the right DNS server, it'll say like, oh, you're asking for domain controllers and you're at this IP address, so you're at this site, so sites and services. Here's your list of 5, available AD controllers that are in your local area, right? 1 or 2 or 5, whatever. The computer then connects and goes, hey, I want to authenticate, because the computer has its own account, so wants to authenticate, and it goes to that list, right? Oh, there's 5 things. First one, can't get connected. Second one, can't get connected. Third one, can't get connected. Fourth one, can't get connected. Fifth one, oh, fifth one works, right? So that's part of the delay, right? Because it got this list and it goes in a round robin order. If none of them connects, it goes, hey man, none available on my site. I got to go, ask for another one. Like, hey, is there another site that can help me out? And so that sometimes is that delay that they have to go through. Once they get a domain controller that works, the workstation, so I'm just talking about PCs, workstation likes to hold on to it and say, and that's what they call logon server, that property, and goes, all right, now I have this thing. So now when a user logs on, like Conrad goes to log on, it'll say, I'm going to log on using the logon server because it worked for me. And then it tries to bind to that one all the time. That's why when that's not working, they say reset the computer, because then the computer goes to this whole through this whole order again. Anyway, so if DNS wasn't functioning right, if it couldn't give me access to that, or somebody changed DHCP to point to Google because they said, man, logons are going to the web browsing through this thing is slow, because remember your most of the times your DNS that you're using for your workstation points to your DCs, as it should. And if that's having problems, then I'll just point it to 888. That would be faster. But now my workstation can never find a domain controller. Anyway, yeah,
you bring up a good point there, Conrad. So in sites and services, there are subnets defined. That's another issue that we sometimes see across our customers.
A lot of times people don't put that in there, right? They're like, what is this? I'll just put them all available to everywhere.
Or have everything in a single site, which, hey, if it works, if you have a reliable high-speed connection permanently across the sites, it may work. You don't want that.
Right.
Primarily because if you have one side of the wire goes down, then it's inconsistent. So a lot of the things we look at. The other thing I wanted to just put on this list here is time services. This is something that we've seen, not new, but it's getting more and more often now. We're seeing that sometimes we have now it's the consumerization of IT, right? I can spin up a domain controller up in Azure with very little knowledge really of any technical background. I want a computer, I want it to be this operating system. There's a couple of other things you need to define, maybe a site-to-site VPN for connectivity. Maybe you already have one there and you're just trying to add another domain controller. Well, funny thing is that there's a certain thing that if a domain controller is out of sync with another for more than 5 minutes, it becomes an issue. So we're seeing people now provision a domain controller. It's provisioned in Azure. By default, it's UTC time. Their local server is California time, Pacific Mountain Central, whatever, and they change one facet of it without changing the other. And time server isn't configured to go to an authoritative data source. PDC role is not working correctly, so it doesn't know where to go. Then you have this split brain personality. If you have Exchange thrown into the mix here on-prem, then you start either sending emails in the future or in the past, so it just becomes a widespread problem.
Yeah, it's every time I run into that issue around time services, one, it's extremely frustrating because it doesn't seem to really call itself out. And then once you find it, like, hey, the times are different, you think, how can times be different, right? Well, you can manually set it. The clock on the BIOS on the on the virtual machine on-prem is somebody had set it incorrectly or whatever. It could have issues, and now they're not looking. Most of the times they use like one of the government standards, or time.windows.com is another one. But let's in the interest of time, we'll keep on moving. So There are different tools. So, at Agile IT, kind of skipping a little bit towards the bottom a bit, but, when we do these health checks, we use some, all parts of this, just depends on the customer scenario. Their makeup, sometimes they're in different sites and locations. We got to run different ways, different forest, multi-forest domain controllers. So sometimes you can run it once, sometimes you have to run these same processes multiple times at different locations, even for one customer. So don't just think like, oh, well, if I run it on one place, it's great for all of it. Well, if you have, if you have two forests, multiple child domains, I wouldn't trust one result for one area. I'd probably run it 2 or 3 times in different areas. But, you should really look at doing this, if nothing else, at least quarterly in your environment, as exhaustive as you can. If you're a simple environment, you could probably script it out. We do that for some of our customers where we'll automate it and script it just so we can get results and kind of capture any major changes. But so a lot of the built-in tools, we could talk about these 3 real quick, are kind of fundamental parts of it, because it really does tell you a lot of what's there. There's, for Rep Admin, I think there's like a UI version of this. I kind of prefer because I like all the little dancing stars. But if you just run this command line, it just goes on any domain controllers. But what are these, Ray? I think we have examples of this.
We have screenshots of each. The Rep Admin one isn't that great because the machines we use to run this scenario is actually a single domain controller, so it wasn't replicating with another one. That's why we're not seeing that. But DC Diag basically runs a couple of tests. As you can see on this screen here, it says it'll tell you if it passed or if it failed. Now, what's important to note here is the fact that it won't change the color of the line. It won't, scream out at you. It'll just say something like we have highlighted here, where it says there are warning errors within the last 24 hours that sysfall has been shared. Now, in this particular scenario, this is acceptable. Why? Well, first of all, we just stood up the machine maybe 4 hours prior to this screenshot being taken. Mm-hmm. So contextually, we're fine. It has built-in check to do this for a 24-hour scope. There will be issues if you just promote a domain controller without having that time capsule elapsed. Everything else you see here will say passed or failed. RID manager, objects replicated, net logon, so on and so forth. This is a great starting point for you to take a look and see, okay, what server did it execute against? As you can see there, the name of the server is win dash and a large number, right? If you have multiple domain controllers, it would list each one, and it would list which ones are having an issue, which ones are having issues in which areas. So that's at least a good starting point to start pinpointing or isolating the problem to a site, a set of servers, or a particular one. Rep Admin, this is the one that Conrad was talking about. If we were to have multiple domain controllers you're replicating, you would see where it says source, directory services. I'm not sure what the A stands for anymore. It's been a while since I looked at the Microsoft books. It would tell you the largest delta in minutes or in seconds if it's, if it's a constant replication. It usually is a couple of minutes unless you're forcing replication, then it'll tell you right away. What you really want to focus on here is the error column and the fails total percentage. If you had a domain controller that was maybe patched or was going through an extended service pack deployment and it was offline for an hour, then maybe 1 failure or 2 replications acceptable. Usually you want to see zeros here. If you see anything beyond that, it's cause for concern.
Right.
And finally, we're using different tools here at Agile IT. One of the ones we use is actually a collection script. This tells us not necessarily the health of a domain by itself, but it provides us with the information so we can take an informed decision and classify the health as being, good or bad. It also lists if there's any additional issues, like it tells you where the sites are at the bottom section there, what domain that site is servicing, and what the primary domain controller for that site is.
Right. I will tell you that, when as a good common practice, that's not really done enough. Sometimes in IT, we, there's such demands on us, right, within an organization, not just like ourselves, but as an IT organization or department. We're a valuable resource and everybody wants our time. This is one of those things that you really should spend the time to do it when you know it's healthy, right? Run this report when you know it's healthy. Capture it. So I don't know if everybody knows, like you can do DC diag, whatever the parameters do, greater than, report.txt, and then it'll whatever came in the the results will get dumped into that file. So the nice thing when you run it like that, capture when it's good, right? So that way you can say, hey, everything's working, no errors. You should have that file that says that for a couple of reasons. One, when somebody goes, well, hey, when did this go bad? Well, I have this report from 3 weeks ago or 2 months ago when it was good, and this is what it said. Now it looks like this, and I can see the difference, right? I can see the difference. So if you can automate it monthly, that's great. Weekly, probably don't need to, but you can go through it. But even having this, because sometimes we go to customers like, hey, what do you have? They'll express it and tell us, but if you had a report, it's nice. We do run this at customers.
And there are important pieces of information here that I purposely left as is, so we can just take a look at. In this case, you can see here, out of the gate, this is just something we didn't really configure in depth.
Oh, can I take a guess? Oh, you're gonna point it already. I was gonna say the wrong thing. I was gonna say recycle bin enabled is false.
That's one of them.
I want to turn that one on. Why would that be off?
That's a huge one that'll, save, hopefully, a lot of people a lot of headaches when they turn it on.
Oh, I can see right here. You got Windows Server 2008 R2 Forest, which is probably why it's off, false by default. Right?
There you go. The other thing that you want to see here is the fact that we don't have a subnet and we have a site. So there's a couple of things here, sites without site connections, one of them. So again, it won't tell you out the gate, this is a problem. You just need to know what to look for in these types of things.
So Miguel, we're only one site with one subnet. Why would I need to put that in?
Well, you're free not to, but it'll make your life a whole lot easier, and it'll have the computer be able to locate the site for future growth. Because this is it. This environment is a snapshot in time as is right now.
Yeah.
If you had a new one, then you're setting it up. You're setting yourself up.
Well, that's really, I think, the right answer is that start good patterns and practices from the very beginning, and people will follow it as you go through. Nobody likes it when you're the new IT person, you come in and go, why weren't these things set up? And we just keep adding to it. Like, well, if we start that pattern from the beginning. Now, if you don't have it today, I would still take the time to add it in and then get the results from it later on.
This is what we were looking at before for DNS management. Usually when we have stale records, they show up here as Kerberos or LDAP records. As you can see there, first thing the computer will look at is in this particular folder for TCP connection for the domain. It'll tell you, okay, these are all the domain controllers that can serve for Kerberos authentication and LDAP. If you have stray objects here, they'll still be considered as live. The computer doesn't know which one's live.
Right, so then the scenario I gave, the workstation comes up, goes, hey, DNS, it knows its domain, and then it asks for these, underlying TCP, service location objects, and then it just accepts it. It has no idea if it's there or not until it asks it, and that's why it starts to hang. So this is actually one of the cheap and easy places that I'll look first, is I'll go in here and go, hey, look at the timestamp. This thing has been refreshed in 2 years. I go, oh, that server's been dead. And well, this probably is a leader into a lot of other problems. So in summary, there's a lot of things in the AD subject, and we'll probably do more of these kind of sessions, and in future sessions, we'll try and show some of the other tools live. It's hard with this because some of the information we want to show might show too much, right? Some other IPs, but we're going to build out a lab to show a little bit more of that on future Tech Talk. But so one thing is check on it at least quarterly, at the very least quarterly, but monthly is a really good start. Automate as much as you can. The running those things are command line tools. You can easily create a Windows scheduled task, have it run, just dump it into a file and be done with it. And make sure that when that the health check that you use really matches your environment. If you're a complex environment, a simple health check isn't going to give you enough. And one that we really didn't talk about, but I really want to make sure we know about it all the time, is don't forget to back up your domain controllers and test out restores. Not just restores of a domain controller, because sometimes they die and you want to bring it back, but also if you didn't have recycle bin turned on and you did have to revert back to or if it wasn't recycle bin and got flushed out and you did have to revert to a backup, you probably don't want to apply all the backups, because now you might lose people, lose workstations. So you have to do what's called authoritative restore. It's probably a fun topic for another day, which is, let me tell you, still not the easiest thing to do. It's really challenging. So when doing your backups, really what you need a backup is system state is the number one thing you have to look at. Anyway, anything else you wanted to add before we wrap up?
Not. I think we covered mostly everything.
Cool. I think we covered a lot of things. We probably went a little overboard. If there's any additional questions you guys want to add, feel free. We'll go ahead and unmute the lines too in case you wanted to just ask directly, or you can type it in.